Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey, and Bill and Ted Face the Music. Not only is this franchise one of the cornerstone of pop culture that has stood the test of time thanks to the multiple references to it in media since its conception in the late 80s, but is also responsible for the career of one of the most kind and humble Canadian immortals the world has ever seen. But with the release of the third installment of the franchise, Bill and Ted Face the Music, in the incredible garbage fire year that is 2020, placing the duo in their biggest adventure yet, this film, almost 30 years in the making, classifies the Bill and Ted franchise as a movie trilogy. But is it a proper movie trilogy? And if not, how can we make it one? Let's find out. Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure was released on February 17, 1989, and written by Ed Solomon and Chris Matheson, based on a stand-up routine the two performed during their college days. They took a huge chance shopping it around because of the demographic the movie was aimed at, but it eventually landed at De Laurentiis and was distributed via Orion Pictures after a bit of script restructuring. The gamble in question was that it would either be a huge hit or a huge flop, according to the film's director Stephen Herrick, because it was written to be specifically aimed at the first few waves of Gen Xers like Solomon and Matheson themselves. Yet, despite negative reviews from Variety, Washington Post, and the New York Times, the gamble paid off and brought around $40 million to the box office with a budget between $6 and $10 million. And along with the film gaining a cult following and gaining a footing in modern-day pop culture because of it, it also became the first step in Keanu Reeves' journey of a leading actor in Hollywood, with Ted being his breakout role. Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey came out 2 years later on July 19, 1991, once again written by Solomon and Matheson, but this time directed by Pete DeWitt, who would later direct the films Tom and Huck with Jonathan Taylor Thomas, The Borrowers with John Goodman, and the first CGI Garfield movie starring Bill Murray. Originally titled Bill and Ted Go to Hell because they go to hell in this one. It's less of a time travel adventure and more of a journey through the afterlife, considering that the film slightly parodies the Swedish historical fantasy film The Seventh Seal, where death, also known as the Grim Reaper, plays a prominent role. Out of the first two movies, Bogus Journey has to be my favorite one, due to a lot of the creative decisions that were made throughout the story, like the way hell is portrayed, and the very personification of death himself.
You might be a king or a little street sweeper, but sooner or later you dance with the Reaper.
And apparently I'm not alone in that regard, because while the movie didn't rake in as much of a profit as its 1989 counterpart with a box office total of $38 million compared to its budget of $20 million, reviewers and critics found the film a lot funnier than the original. And while Variety still disliked it in comparison to the original, the Washington Post wasn't afraid to give kudos to where they were due. By the time Bogus Journey was made, both the writer duo Solomon and Matheson and the bodacious duo Keanu Reeves and Alex Winter became good friends with each other, but talk about a third installment of the Bill and Ted franchise didn't really start circulating between the four of them until around 2005, when Keanu Reeves was asked if he'd ever play Ted again. And upon him saying, absolutely, the four started thinking about whether or not it could happen. Then, 5 years later, Bill himself, Alex Winter, revealed that Solomon and Matheson found a way to make it work that's both appropriate for where the characters would be, and that would bring the franchise full circle to its time-traveling roots. Thus, with a bit of elbow grease and a lot of growth, Bill and Ted Face the Music was conceived and had just the unfortunate circumstance of being slated for release of August 28, 2020, in the midst of the summer completely claimed by COVID-19. And because they made the decision to release the film on video on demand instead of gambling with a theatrical release, despite it still having one, the box office numbers reflected that decision with an as of now number of $6.1 million in comparison to a $25 million budget. Nevertheless, it is currently the most highly praised installment of the Bill and Ted franchise, even from the media outlets that looked down at the previous installments before. And more importantly, because of its overall story, it not only opens the door for more adventures with the now properly introduced daughters of Bill and Ted, Billy and Thea, but also allows a proper retirement of the characters Bill and Ted in a way that ties the first three movies together in a complete arc. I'm gonna be honest with you, readers. I never grew up with the Bill and Ted movies growing up, so my initial reaction to Bill and Ted Face the Music's marketing for 2020 was basically, eh. And while that did change upon me watching all three of the films for the first time to make this video, I'd be lying if I said that there isn't a specific kind of 80s first wave Gen X nostalgia that possesses excellent adventure over the course of the movie, especially during the third act. Yes, I know that this bit of criticism is to be expected, especially coming from a millennial with the baby boomer parents whose childhood took place in the 90s and whose teenage years happened during the first decade of the 2000s. The only difference is that I only point that out because upon seeing said levels of nostalgia, I am completely aware that while still widely enjoyable, Excellent Adventure was not, at its core, meant for me. It's part of the reason why I enjoy Bogus Journey a bit more than Excellent Adventure. While there were definitely some lingering 80s vibes, the 90s were still a bit undefined to the point where there wasn't so much nostalgia for the movie to soak it up. Also, Bill and Ted's journey to hell and back, meeting, beating, and eventually befriending death, and even the adventure they had to take in order to keep a fixed point in time from being drastically altered felt a bit more compelling to me than the Ferris Bueller-esque race they had to go on to present their history report on time. Bill and Ted Face the Music is kinda on par with Bogus Journey with me in that regard. Because while it's still a comedy featuring two airheaded dude bros with hearts of gold, now in their mid-50s and have families of their own, it takes some time to explore to a certain extent a lot of the themes in the first two movies that Generation X folk dealt with. Specifically how they were treated by their baby boomer parents, and how, in turn, they learned how to become better parents to their own children. And trust me, there is a lot I can say on that subject alone when it comes to how the Bill and Ted trilogy tackles it, but that's not the point of this video. The point of this video is to see if Bill and Ted Face the Music, narrative-wise, acts as a proper closing chapter to the trilogy by tracing back to the first installment in a way to bring the entire franchise full circle. And in order for us to do that, we have to unpack the overall plot of the movie, which, in retrospect, is a pretty simple one. It's the year 2020, and Wild Stallion has been declining in popularity since their world-famous debut at the 1991 Battle of the Bands. And that's because the song Rufus told them that they would make in order to unify the world back when they aced their history report in 1988 has yet to be made, and every attempt has had mixed results. However, because the song hasn't been made, space and time is beginning to collapse in itself. Historical figures and monuments are starting to randomly show up in places where they don't belong, and if they don't get the song created and played by 7:17 p.m., reality as we know it will cease to exist. Now, you would imagine just from this premise alone that Bill and Ted Face the Music ticks all the boxes associated with a third installment of a franchise, establishing the whole as a proper trilogy. There's a thread in the first film's plot that plays a significant role in the third in a way that makes all three films work together as one cohesive story. This allows the third film to reveal new information about what's being carried over from the first and expand upon it in various ways, revealing something new about it, make it play a role in the plot of said installment, or sometimes both at the same time. With Face the Music, it implies that the thread carried over from Excellent Adventure is the fact that they'll eventually make a song that'll unify the world. And the new information Face the Music gives that thread taken from Excellent Adventure is that the song needs to be made by a specific time in order to stop the world from ending. But readers, what if I told you that the Excellent Adventure thread in question is actually misconstrued? Well, in order to prove my point, and show Ed Solomon and Chris Matheson, the writers of all three Bill and Ted movies, that I'm not just being nitpicky for the sake of it, just in case they watch this, we have to go back to Excellent Adventure and take a better look at the thread in question. As I stated before, readers, outside of the use of an anti-LGBT slur that shows the film's age just as much as the mall scene in the third act, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure is one of the closest thing to an 80s John Hughes teen film without John Hughes being directly involved. So much so that it's inspired the works of a lot of other creatives and has been referenced in a lot of recent media that has since become modern-day staples in pop culture. J.G. Quintel, the creator of the animated shows Regular Show and Close Enough, is clearly one of those creatives.
Whoa!
But I'm not gonna lie. Being 32, knowing nothing about the franchise outside of the involvement of time travel, and watching Excellent Adventure for the first time, I kinda expected something different when I first started up the movie. Instead of the comedy that was presented, I expected, and I am absolutely sure there's someone out there that can write an entire paper on how the franchise is exactly that, a subtle yet comedic piece of the human condition as it was presented in the late 80s. And this assumption was mainly in part to the futuristic character of Rufus, portrayed by the late great comedian George Carlin.
Greetings, my excellent friend.
Now, before I proceed, I want to make it very clear. I am in no way attempting to make George Carlin a monolith. Some people did exactly that with Louis C.K. and ooh, look how that turned out. Nevertheless, unlike a lot of individuals out there, I wasn't introduced to George Carlin through his comedy. To me, he was, and always will be, Mr. Conductor of Thomas and Friends back when it was on PBS. I wasn't aware of his adult-oriented comedy until I was in my freshman year of college. And while there's a lot that I agree with him regarding his work, like his points of view regarding the inner workings of politics and the multinational conglomerates being what truly grips this country, some of said points you can argue have gotten slightly better considering who we currently have as representatives now. There are things he mentions in his comedy that I both don't really care and play devil's advocate for, such as the reason why he didn't vote in elections when he was alive and his opinions regarding American obesity. So when I saw that George Carlin was in this movie, and as a result, the entire franchise, and learning that he was a time traveler, I expected his character of Rufus to pretty much be an embodiment of himself, an observer who takes note of the things happening around him. And while it wasn't as deep or as profound as I expected it to be, considering what I knew about how his mind worked, I still kind of received that, albeit on a pretty simple level. Only instead of taking the information in the movie and going, I just think it's funny how, he attempted to either correct or stay the course in order to make sure things happened accordingly. In giving Bill and Ted access to his time machine so that they can go to different points in history in an attempt to ace their history report, he does exactly that, and explains why he did it when their excellent adventure reaches its end and they aced said report.
That's why I was sent to make sure you passed your history report. If you guys were separated, it would have been disastrous for life as we know it.
Now, for those of you who eat, drink, and breathe time travel stories, you know this aspect as a fixed point in time, something that has to happen in a timeline in order for things to proceed a certain way, like the kiss during the Under the Sea Ball in Back to the Future Part 1 that ensures that Marty McFly and his siblings, actually exist. In the Bill and Ted trilogy, there are two prominent ones before Face the Music happens. The two acing their history report in order for Ted to keep from going to military school in Excellent Adventure, and the duo winning the Battle of the Bands in Bogus Journey, and thus planting the roots of the futuristic utopia as the band Wild Stallion. And with both of these events, Rufus helps them accomplish them in one way or another so that they stay in place. However, in his explanation of why he helped them in Excellent Adventure due to the reveal that their music would be the cornerstone of this eventual utopian society, he also lets them know something else as well.
Eventually, your music will help put an end to war and poverty. It will align the planets and bring them into universal harmony, allowing meaningful contact with all forms of life, from extraterrestrial beings to common household pets.
Now, you might be thinking to yourself, that's it. That's the thread. That's what Ed and Chris took from Excellent Adventure to Face the Music. But while it is true that this is the intended thread brought over to Face the Music, that's not what happened in the movie. Because in Face the Music, Bill and Ted are operating under the information that Rufus told them that there was one specific song that achieves all of this, when according to the thread being brought over, it's a broader generalization he's referring to. He doesn't say eventually you create a song that will put an end to war and poverty. He says eventually your music will help put an end to war and poverty. The thread that was taken from Excellent Adventure in order for Face the Music to properly connect with it has thus been misconstrued for it to fit with the third movie's overall plot, thus making it fall a bit short of making the whole a proper movie trilogy. But fortunately, there is a way to adjust certain things in the third film to not only make it fit the mold of a proper movie trilogy, but also stay true to the initial movie we received and the themes it explores within it. So, in order for Bill and Ted Face the Music's initial story to work as originally intended and unite the three films as a proper movie trilogy, we need what the majority of individuals could afford to have more of in their lives. We need more George Carlin. Let me break it down for you. In Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, Rufus informs Bill and Ted that their music will help put an end to war and poverty, align the planets, and bring them into universal harmony, allowing meaningful contact with all forms of life. In Bill and Ted Face the Music, Bill and Ted are acting under the information that Rufus told them all those years ago and had to be a part of one song to accomplish those feats, racing against the clock to make it before all of reality is destroyed. So let's establish that Rufus knew Bill and Ted had to be involved in this specific song in order to keep the timeline intact, but purposefully kept that information to himself. Here's why. When Rufus traveled back to 1988 to help Bill and Ted with their history report, he did so in order to make sure they weren't separated so that they can proceed to form Wild Stallion. Same when he intervened to solidify a spot for them in the Battle of the Bands in 1991 under the guise of Miss Wardrobe. Rufus's main goal was to make sure these fixed and pivotal points in time were preserved in the timeline so that the future he comes from, and reality as a result, stays intact. But remember what I said about the character of Rufus reflecting the real-life personality of George Carlin regarding him being a watcher of things that takes notes on what he observes? Well, Rufus still reflects exactly that in this adjustment. He wasn't lying when he said that the future utilizes their music and whatnot as the cornerstone of their society. As a matter of fact, he probably let them know everything he told them at the end of Excellent Adventure because he knew it wouldn't put too much pressure on them. If anything, it would inspire them to go out and do exactly that. Basically, what I'm saying is that in this adjustment, he only let them know that much because he knew they could only handle that much. If Rufus told them at the end of Excellent Adventure that he did all of this because one day in the year 2020 at 7:17 p.m. they would partake in a song that would unite the world and that he made sure these fixed points in time happened in order to keep the universe from unraveling, who knows how teenage Bill and Ted would have reacted?
No way!
Especially after seeing how adult Bill and Ted reacted when they found out the news.
Oh.
No, in order for Face the Music to work, Rufus had to have known that this potentially apocalyptic event was going to happen. And when the first threat to the current timeline in the form of the history report happened, he knew he had to be the one to not only set them on the right path, but to actually allow them to mold the events over the course of their excellent adventure that are responsible for the utopia the future ends up becoming. But because he knows just how much someone can take from his observational nature, Rufus only lets them know information about the things they discovered along the way and gives a lighter, fluffier, Obi-Wan Kenobi certain point of view variant of the destiny they would eventually manifest. And considering that in Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey, it's revealed that Rufus is a university professor and a historian by trade, it's pretty safe to say that all of these changes we make to regarding how much Rufus knows about the overall timeline would still be acceptable for his character. Unfortunately, because George Carlin is no longer with us, and Face the Music also retires Rufus for that same reason, we can't use him to dispute this exposition in order for Face the Music to reveal this new info about the thread at the end of Excellent Adventure in order to solidify the plot regarding the end of space and time. Thankfully, we have a new, and in my opinion, honestly underused, conduit in the form of Kristen Schaall's Kelly, one of Rufus's children.
Greetings, my excellent friends.
The way we use Kelly in this regard is that she's the one that stumbles upon her father's research about Bill and Ted's involvement in the creation of the song that unites the world and lets the two know about the dilemma. They, upon remembering Rufus's words at the end of Excellent Adventure and remembering everything they accomplished to set up the bedrock of the utopian future in Bogus Journey, think they've already manifested the destiny Rufus informed them of. That's when they find out through Kelly that Rufus only let them know what they needed to know in order for them to naturally be in the proper place to help create the song once the year 2020 hits, so that there's a proper reveal about every aspect of his actions from the first movie onward. Proper exposition about the thread that was initially stitched in the first movie. But upon doing so, she lets them know that Rufus's research about the song is incomplete, and that the scattering of different historical landmarks and individuals across certain points in time is proof that while Wild Stallions' music is still the bedrock of the future Rufus and Kelly come from thanks to the preservation of the two fixed points in time, the song that they're part of to unite the world hasn't been played yet. That way, it still establishes the end of Bogus' journey as a significant fixed point in the timeline to ensure their society and the duo's involvement in the plot. That's when Bill and Ted go on their journey to find their future selves, hoping they achieved creating the song in their later years in order to save the world. Meanwhile, Kelly, just like her father, only tells Bill and Ted what they need to know in order to ensure their role in the creation of the song is established in the timeline, and does the same with Billy and Thea, Bill and Ted's respective daughters, by sending them on their own excellent adventure of picking up historical musicians to form a band when their dads return with the song, knowing from her father's research that it's Bill and Ted's daughters that will create the song they're going to be a part of to unite the world. Creating the third and final fixed point in not only Rufus and Kelly's utopian future, but also in making sure that the world is saved. Now, for those of you who have seen Face the Music, you might be saying to yourself that there's still one more loose end in order to cover in order to make these changes work. And that's in the form of Rufus's widow and Kelly's mother, the Great Leader. She's the one that has very little faith in Bill and Ted to create the song on time, and she's the one who sicks the time-traveling robot, Dennis, to kill them, because some believe that the deaths of Bill and Ted is what unifies the world instead of the song. Her fix is actually pretty simple, and like Kelly, would help extend the posthumous role Rufus has in regards to the whole trilogy. All it would take would be to adjust one scene between Kelly and herself.
Kelly, you know your father and I agreed on everything.
Considering the decisions she made over the course of Face the Music and how she reacted when she first met Bill and Ted, it's a bit hard to believe that she saw the two in the same reverence as Rufus did back in the day. Not as bad as Chuck de Nomolos from Bogus Journey, of course, but she definitely wasn't at the same state of nirvana the 2688 Council of the Utopian Future was in when the two visited during their excellent adventure. No, instead of the Great Leader and Rufus agreeing on everything, I'd adjust it so that the role Bill and Ted played in the uniting of the world was one of the things they disagreed on. Because their very society is based on the two's music and their philosophy, she believes that making them martyrs upon the time of the collapse is what's necessary to unite the world in order to avoid it, especially since so much of Wildstein's music has been its cornerstone for well over 30 years already. And considering her role as the Great Leader on the council, her duties would eliminate her from time traveling to the extent as Rufus did to see for herself how wrong she was, pretty much keeping her theories as just that, theories. So when she and Kelly are discussing things as the clock ticks ever closer, Kelly would reflect the passion and the work of her father, while the Great Leader would reflect her own feelings. Throw in a bit of authoritative parenting, which is a common thread over the course of this entire trilogy when it comes to how she raises her children as opposed to what Rufus did when he was alive, and you have another plot thread that comes full circle. Which, upon meeting Bill and Ted for the first time, upon instructing them to create the song and realizing that they hijacked a time machine, would not only paint them in a bad light with her, but have her realize that in order to keep their society from crumbling by realizing it was all based on two dimwits that are a collective 250 pounds of muscle away from being classified as himbos, killing them off might not only make sure their way of life isn't tampered with by finding out how simple they are, but might also save all of space and time. But because Kelly, who follows the work of her father, knows differently and knows exactly the steps that she needs to take in order to make sure that their society and the very existence can stay intact, she battles and butts heads with her. Maybe she even has the Wild Stallions album that Rufus had Bill and Ted sign for him at the end of Excellent Adventure because it was technically for his kids, and she received that when he passed away. And to help show the difference and the dynamic and what needs to be worked on between her and the Great Leader is on some King Triton shit and destroys the signed album in front of her, establishing her authoritative figure, which is, once again, a theme that has been prominent in this entire trilogy. Making these adjustments to Face the Music not only makes sure George Carlin's legacy as the character Rufus is more cemented throughout the story that's bigger than just a digitally hologrammed homage to his first scene meeting the boys in Excellent Adventure, but it also gives Kelly more to do, while also allowing the Great Leader to have a bit of a redemption arc with Kelly as well, that kind of reflects the trilogy-long arc that Ted and his police chief dad underwent that started with the baby boomer demand of authoritarian respect from their ex-Gen children, the critique of seeing said members of Gen X refusing to utilize the same parenting techniques on their Millennial and Gen Z children due to the trauma they suffered from it, and the eventual healing that takes place between boomers and their Gen X children upon the realization that they were wrong. But like I said earlier, we don't have time to unpack all of that. The parent-child dynamic in the Bill and Ted trilogy is a video essay in its own right. Bill and Ted Face the Music is, honest to goodness, a pretty great send-off to Bill and Ted's arc that started in 1988. And even without my adjustments in order for everything to properly tie in with each other, it's still a fun movie in its own right. I would definitely recommend you catch it. But after you watch the movies and you were ever wondering if it was possible, make no mistake that the Bill and Ted movies, as they are now, have the potential to be a funny, bodacious, most excellent, and a proper movie trilogy. And yes, Ed and Chris, I also want more Billy and Thea. Anyone who says otherwise is lying. Right now, you can find the entire Bill and Ted trilogy on demand to either rent or buy. But if you want to purchase them and also help financially support the channel, I'll have affiliate links for them in the description box below. So with that being said, readers, your homework assignment for the day. Write in the comment section below what you think about the Bill and Ted trilogy if you've seen it. Or if you feel like sharing with the rest of the class, another trilogy you want to see me tackle later on in this segment. Whichever you decide to answer, I'd love to know your thoughts. A Proper Movie Trilogy is possible thanks to the generous supporters over on Patreon. So if you enjoyed this video and you want to see more, you can join it by clicking the card at the end of the video or in the link in the description down below, where you can also find a link to my merchandise store. Or if you prefer to give a one-time donation, you can find links to my PayPal and my Ko-fi account in the description box as well. Also, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because I post new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and every other Friday. But until then, this is Readus 101. Class dismissed.